Welcome to State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well, broadcasting on KSQD Santa Cruz on 90.7 FM and live streaming at ksqd.org. I'm the producer and usual host, Deborah Sloss, licensed marriage and family therapist, and this is part 2 of a 2-part series on racism and mental health. Today we'll be exploring how racism impacts access to mental health support and discuss ways we can improve mental health by making it more accessible to Blacks and people of color. In last month's show, we discussed the mental health effects of racism and how we can help make our communities more humane. Last month, white listeners were asked to listen with open minds and hearts, to manage our "yeah, but" reactions, and be aware of shifts in us as we come face to face with the real and painful effects of racism in our communities. In response to that inquiry, we heard from a community member.
Hi, my name is Tree. I am 61 years old with a 37-year career in nursing with a current focus on holistic wellness. The murder of George Floyd and the ensuing response of political activism impacted my heart in a deep way and initiated a proactive journey of educating myself and learning about my own biases. Having grown up in the Deep South in the very black city of New Orleans and then spending the last 33 years in the very white city of Santa Cruz provided me an opportunity to explore perceptions, fears, and bias that were conditioned from an early age. My 27-year-old daughter was passionate in her involvement with early local protest and challenged my ingrained assumptions, helping me to open to seeing my own ignorance in this area of systemic racism. I started reading books, watching documentaries and movies, and listening to podcasts to educate myself. I felt stopped in my tracks in reading Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, as I experienced my entrenched blinders start to loosen and the feelings of discomfort I had numbed to throughout my life came to the surface. Recently, completing Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, has helped me understand the house of cards our country is built on and how deep these equity issues run in our history, paired with the lack of accountability, greatly impairing our wellness as a country. One message has been clear in my education, that as whites, we need to do our own work. I was grateful then to join friends in an ongoing anti-racism exploratory group where it feels safe to be vulnerable and exploring my naivete. I was able to acknowledge an inner discomfort that has always existed with a sense of helplessness of knowing what to do as well as my own lack of taking responsibility for how I contribute. I am now able to grieve the missed opportunity of growing up in New Orleans, to wonder what it would have been like to engage in diverse community and know the beauty of the Black culture that surrounded me, rather than keep to our separate lives and roles, even as we stood side by side at the Mardi Gras parades, but worlds apart, and to acknowledge the limited diversity in Santa Cruz, as well as my lack of engagement to create a diverse community of friends. As a holistic nurse coach, I know the importance of the relationship between physical and mental health as I get the opportunity to focus with clients on their desire for health and well-being, and how individual health and well-being impact our community and nation. In my current readings, I am feeling impacted by Ta-Nehisi Coates as well as Bryan Stevenson, and although it feels like the first baby steps taken, I feel my commitment and the opportunity and hope of continued learning, of finding ways to take responsibility and to take action to effect change towards exploring reconciliation and reparations to support our nation's well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Tree. Given that I'm a white female, we decided instead to hear from those who experience the difficult realities of racism every day. So once again, we turn the microphone over to Black community members here in Santa Cruz and the Bay Area. I will not be a participant. Instead, I'll be listening and thinking about how I can support greater social justice and healthcare access as a mother, daughter, sister, wife, psychotherapist, radio host, and community member. This show is being recorded in remote locations due to the coronavirus pandemic. We ask your forgiveness for any sound quality issues in this recording. Sadly, because of a death in her family, last month's host, Gail Borkowski, isn't able to join us again today, so I welcome back psychologist Dr. Robert Barti as guest host for today's conversation. Dr. Barti, a licensed clinical psychologist for over 25 years, was greatly influenced by teacher and mentor Dr. Robert Williams, a founding member of the Association of Black Psychologists established in San Francisco in 1968. This led Dr. Barti to focus on the strengths and resilience of Black clients and the impact of pervasive institutional racism on Black mental health and physical health. Dr. Barti has taught courses, led workshops, and seminars on Black psychology and diversity issues in mental health for students and professionals. He retired from UC Santa Cruz in 2010 and currently has a private practice and works part-time for Family Service Agency of the Central Coast. Welcome, Dr. Barti.
Thank you, Deborah. I wanted to take a moment to remind everyone that in part, this series of shows on racism came in response to the murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police and the ongoing Black Lives Matter movement. Today, we're continuing a conversation about racism and mental health. This is not a new conversation for any of us on this panel. Whether we work with these issues as professionals or we've had our own experiences with racism and how it affects our mental health and the mental health of others, we've been in conversation with friends, family, colleagues, allies, and accomplices for quite some time. Reviewing some of the data from Mental Health America, 16% or 4.8 million Black or African American people reported having a mental illness. Disparity in treatment for both health and mental health issues when compared to white counterparts is pervasive. In mental health alone, Black people are diagnosed with more severe issues. Black people with serious mental health issues are more likely to come in contact with law enforcement and more likely to end up in jail or prison. Black people with mental health issues are offered medication or therapy at lower rates than the general population. In 2018, nearly 90% of Black people over the age of 12 with a substance use disorder did not receive treatment. In 2016, 12.3% of Black people who had a doctor's office or clinic visit had difficulty getting care, test, or treatment, compared to 6.8% of white adults. We ask those of you listening to our conversation, ask yourself, what can you do with this knowledge, especially around improving issues of service, access, and change in healthcare and mental health care systems for Black people and people of color? But first, let me tell you a little more about our guest today. Lisa Lehua Taylor is a transracial adoptee who moved to Santa Cruz from the Big Island in 2004. She is a professional vocalist and early childhood educator, moving from one place where she was the only Black persons around, and as a teacher, she received many questions from her preschoolers about her skin color. Lisa has realized that trying to implement an anti-racism curriculum here in Santa Cruz has proven to be a real challenge. This has led to her making the decision to focus her future attention and efforts on anti-bias education. Joy Flynn is a local activist who organized the first peaceful action in the county in response to the killing of George Floyd, which received national attention. Her efforts have brought Black folks together in a profound and tangible way never before seen in this community. Joy, along with other Black community members, have worked and continue to work with government officials on police reform. Joy is a founding member of the Santa Cruz County Black Coalition for Justice and Racial Equity, which recently worked with county supervisors to declare racism as a public health crisis. She currently serves as a Second Harvest Food Bank board trustee and is a friend of the Walnut Avenue Family and Women's Shelter. Jason Sills is an African-centered educator in the tradition of activist intellectual, working to address critical systemic issues and empower individuals for personal and social transformation. An Oakland native, Jason has had over 2 decades of experience serving his community, locally and nationally and globally, as an educator, thought leader, speaker, and change agent. Jason obtained a BA in sociology from San Jose State, a master's in Africana Studies from the University of Albany, and a master's of education and counseling psychology from the University of San Francisco. He works full-time at Merritt College, where he currently serves as the chair of ethnic studies and is a tenured professor of African American studies. Jason is often called upon to provide his expertise as a consultant, curriculum designer, and speaker. Outside of his work, Jason enjoys spending quality time with his children, running, and vibing to an eclectic array of music. Welcome, and I appreciate you being here with us today.
Good to be here with you all.
Good to be here.
Joy, Lisa, and Jason, if it's appropriate, I'd like to move us into a discussion today of this question concerning racism and Black people's mental health. My question for all of you, are there particular ways that we as Black people, African Americans, or people of color need to be thinking about mental health in the Black community? Go ahead, Lisa.
I guess I could say that, as you said in my intro, I grew up on the Big Island. I didn't grow up around a lot of Black people. So that had issues in itself that I'm still coming to terms with. But I would say that a lot of the people that I know here that might potentially, be interested in finding some help it seems like there's a real stigma in some of the community just surrounding going to find help because of whether it should be something you deal with in church or it you should be stronger than that because you're a Black woman or a Black man. It seems to be a definite. I've never had an issue with it. I have OCD. I've been in therapy pretty much my entire life, but I have learned as I've gotten older that there seems to be kind of a thing about it in the community. I don't know.
Joy.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really kind of a key word, Lisa, and that's strong. And there's this, I guess, this part about being Black that we have to be strong, mentally, physically, emotionally. But there's the amount of trauma that Black people experience over a lifetime is far greater than somebody who's not Black. And really, because it's just such a part of what we experience, I think that gets kind of pushed aside and is just accepted as a part of our experience. And so, of course, the trauma we're experiencing isn't to the extent of what our ancestors experienced when they were brought over and when they were, captured and held into slavery. So it's that. I think there's that comparison that we don't have it as bad. So there's not a need to address these these issues. But there's a lot of research that shows that trauma is passed down generation to generation, and so we still carry that trauma in our bodies, and that needs to be understood and recognized without any judgment and without any shame, and just recognize that it is a burden and a gift in some sort of ways. But when we look at it without, when we begin to accept it as something that was passed down to us, then I think we can approach it from a different angle and, address it really, head on.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Jason.
I really appreciate what both of you all are saying because I think the way we have been socialized around strength and around our trauma, I think has often dictated, our immediate response to hearing words like therapy or mental health. And I think for me, because I've been in the field and I've, to Lisa's point, I've been in therapy for quite some time, believe in it. But my approach was a lot different because I had experience in therapy. When I actually got a therapist, I actually interviewed all my therapists like they were applying for jobs. I had very clear ideas about who I wanted them to be, whether I wanted to be a woman or older, and looking for certain characteristics like being compassionate. But outside of that, I think as a community, I think we should really think about being curators of our own health and wellness. I think we have allowed other people outside of our community to define what it means to be healthy or what we need for our wellness. And so I think we should really center who we are, like our ancestry, our culture, rather than it just always being a response to our trauma. I think I would never say let's minimize racism or any other social dynamic that impacts us, but I think that we shouldn't think about health only in response to trauma or only in response to things that cause us harm. I think we have to envision our wellness far beyond the confines of racism. So for instance, when I think about our ancestors that were enslaved, I don't think any of them thought of envisioning a better form of slavery. They envisioned freedom, something that some people had never experienced. They envisioned that. So I think we should envision our healthiness and wellness far beyond white supremacy or racism, historical oppression. It shouldn't stifle us. And so I really think we should dream beyond the current model of mental health and explore all options for health and wellness.
You're tuned to listener-supported 90.7 FM KSQD Santa Cruz, K-Squid, many voices, one station. And this is State of Mind, being human and living well. I'm Dr. Robert Barti, your host for today's show, and I'm here talking with community members, activist Joy Flynn, educator and musician Lisa Taylor, and educator activist Jason Seals about barriers to health care and specifically mental health supports for Black people and people of color, and how we can improve access. We'll be hearing about their personal experiences and insights gleaned from their work and communities. Stay with us to learn more, and we'll be right back after this brief message from our underwriter.
KSQD thanks Family Service Agency of the Central Coast for supporting this program. Family Service Agency provides counseling and support for people of all ages facing life crises and challenges. You can reach them at 423-9444 to see if they can help you. Thank you, Family Service Agency of the Central Coast, for supporting KSQD 90.7 FM.
Back to our interview. So, Jason, often whenever the discussion of mental health comes up, as Lisa's pointed out, there's this term stigma. Even the mention of mental health, people, for example, will go into graphic details about their personal health, their medical issues, often giving reams of information or knowledge, even unsolicited advice. But how does the stigma around mental health get played out in the Black community?
I think that's a really good question. It's a question that I am a little torn about. I think language is stifling. So I think mental health in itself is one of the reasons why there is a quote unquote stigma around wellness. I think people of African ancestry has always centered wellness, just in different ways. I think about the young Black girl that's growing up in her mother's house and she's sitting between, the knees of her mother getting her hair done. That is a form of wellness because in that exchange, there's going to be some conversation about life. There's going to be some wisdom shared. There's going to be some emoting. And I think that we have allowed other people to frame it. And so I think the word mental health and therapy are barriers for us to actually get to that place of saying, I want support. And so I don't want to minimize that some people are very, I think they are, they have a very distant relationship to ideas around therapy. And some of it is for a good reason. I think there is a history in this country of being skeptical about, social services, white people, and what their intentions are. And so I think that becomes a part of mental health, especially when you go into mental health. And most of the people in mental health are white women or white men. And so why would I, as a person of African ancestry, not feel comfortable going into an office and sharing with someone that might actually be an example and or reflection of oppression? And so I think that we can center this idea that there is a stigma, but let's not limit it to saying that is everyone's experience. I think there are quite a few people that believe in wellness. And I think if we start to change the language and talk about wellness and allow people to define it for themselves, it will be less of an issue.
So keeping that in mind, I'm going to ask you this question, being mindful of not only the role of stigma, but also this idea of wellness. Are there stories that you feel that you can share, maybe about an unnamed friend, a family member, or even yourself, that can highlight aspects of people of color or Black people's experience with accessing mental health services in general? Joy, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I think that one of Jason just kind of spoke to it about the having, a person of color, having a Black person as a mental health wellness expert near us. We just don't have access to that. So finding, other areas where we can redefine what mental health wellness looks like for us. And Jason, I really like what you said about, getting your hair done. And historically, the women who are working in the salons kind of have acted as therapists for Black people, Black women, and the barber shops for Black men. And, I've known about that forever and ever, but I never really kind of put it together like that until Jason, you said that, and how that is a huge part of the culture, a huge part of where we can connect with other people with similar experiences. Whereas if we go into a room, I'm here in Santa Cruz, I'm not aware of any, Black women or Black men who are practicing therapists. So making sure that I'm finding somebody, like, I don't think that I could, it's been a challenge to find somebody who I feel can really connect with my experience personally, to be able to speak to and validate what I'm experiencing with the whole idea of racial gaslighting, when they're not able to even connect with it on any level.
Lisa, what would you like to share about this topic?
I was just going to add, I love as well that Jason brought up hair, because um, even though, I'm adopted, even though my mom was white, she did her best to learn how to do my hair. And that's where we would sit for hours and hours and hours and talk about the day. And now, as an adult, finally finding someone here in Santa Cruz that can do my hair, and walking in there and just feeling like, just so seen, and whoa, we've got so many of the same experiences. And wait, there's a group called Black Girl Magic here in Santa Cruz with other Black people, like other Black women. I just, things I didn't know existed here. And just like Joy said, that validation. And speaking with Deborah, just in preparing for this show and talking about my experiences, like I'd spoken about on the last episode about at my job, where I'd gone for some support, and I heard, well, you got to look in yourself and figure out why that triggered something for you. She said something that blew my mind, which was, that's kind of the Eurocentric view the Eurocentric way of coming at somebody in a therapy, kind of trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not something that's based in something that has experienced what I've experienced in my life would be able to approach me with or have a conversation with me about, because they don't have that lens. So it had never even occurred to me that how important it would be to have a therapist that is Black, that can, I mean, I just thought therapy, just period. I had never even thought about being able to sit down and speak with somebody that has some of the same experiences as I do, someone that um, can validate those experiences and say, no, that happened to you. That is a, you know, that's you're getting gaslighted. That is a microaggression, whatever the terms may be, because even something that happened to me recently, I found myself going through that automatic, well, did I say something that triggered them to say that? Or did did I really understand that correctly? Or no, they couldn't have meant that. And to have somebody sit down and say, no, this is what happens. Um, yeah, I need to find a Black therapist. Something that's on my list. It's really important. I need to do that.
So, Lisa and Joy, I want to address this to you directly. First, let me apologize for what may be an outdated or archaic phrase. I want to explore the concept of double whammy for Black women. The double whammy recognizes the dual negative impacts of sexism, misogyny, in addition to racism on Black women. Is the double whammy still a term even used today? And what needs to be done to address the mental health concerns of the double whammy? Joy.
I was looking forward to this question because I actually had never heard that term, the double whammy. I think what the current term is intersectionality. And it really just speaks to all the aspects that kind of are stacked up against um, so many people, especially Black women, because we, deal with both having brown skin and also being women. And as we know, just as a nation, women in general are also, you know, oppressed, and so to add being Black on top of it, it's just real. And so intersectionality is the word that really covers all of that.
Lisa.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, you do have, like Joey said, I mean, you're a woman, so there's that, and then you're a Black woman on top of that, and you have you know, it just seems like you have, I've been wrestling lately whether to say even Black girl magic, because there are, you know, I've heard the opinion that, you know, people already kind of expect that we're just going to come along and kind of save the day and have, you know, like when there's an election and all the Black women vote and somebody wins, it's like, thank you, Black women, you saved us. And so I've been kind of struggling whether to use that term as much as I love it. I love Black girl magic. So I'm trying to at least upgrade to Black woman magic because I am a woman. But you know, there is a lot kind of placed on us in terms of expectation, just being extra strong. And, you know, like in my last job, it was like, you know, I shouldn't have to be the one bringing up the topic of, you know, anti-racism or, you know, educating our kids. And it was like, well, you can be our ambassador. Like, I don't want to have to teach anybody. I don't want to have to, you know, there's Google, there's so many books. It's so easy to educate yourself these days. And quite frankly, I'm still learning so much about myself and being a Black woman.
Jason, what are your thoughts on this subject?
I feel very triggered and feel very sad because, one, I want to say to both Joy and Lisa, one, you know, just speaking on the behalf of Black men, like, I'm sorry, because I think that we have to acknowledge as well that we play a part of Black women not feeling protected and safe. And so I think there's a dynamic that comes from racism, but I think there's also a pain and trauma that comes from within our community. And so when we think about intersectionality, I think about Black women being, people of African ancestry, but also think about them being women in America and how we have internalized so many negative behaviors that cause so much pain. And so to Joy's point around, how Black women have birthed and developed and nurtured and loved in spite of, I just think, I think it's really important that Black men be advocates and partner with Black women to support healing, to create spaces. And I think that's where, when we think about this conversation of wellness, how, as I spoke to earlier, we have to be the curators of it and creating those spaces within our own communities outside of the confines of white America or anyone else that are allies that want to help.
The acknowledgement of that is so awesome, Jason. Thank you so much. That just like such a validation and that step towards healing. So and a call for your brothers to step into that space too. So thank you.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciated hearing what you all had to say. You're tuned to listener-supported 90.7 FM, KSQD, K-Squid, many voices, one station. And this is State of Mind, being human and living well. We're also live streaming over the web at ksqd.org. And you can find the podcast of all of our shows on Apple and Google Podcasts and on the KSQD website. I'm Dr. Robert Barti, your host for today's show. And I'm here talking with community members, activist Joy Flynn, educator and musician Lisa Taylor, and educator activist Jason Seals. We're talking about issues of access for Black people and people of color to mental health supports, and what kind of systemic changes could help improve that access. We're sharing from our own personal experiences and insights gleaned from our work and communities. I want to remind listeners that every State of Mind show has a resource list posted along with the show. And any of the resources we talk about today can be found on the post for today's show at ksqd.org/state-of-mind/. Now back to our interview. Jason, would you share with us some of the important ideas, concepts, and themes of Afrocentrism? And would you share how you see Afrocentrism's role in Black people's mental health?
I appreciate this question. I think Afrocentrism in general suggests that we should use a lens, language, and understanding that reflects our ancestry. So as people of African ancestry, we have often been given a lot of concepts from white America. If you're in higher ed, we know that academy provides a lot of language and understanding. But I think some of those things are biased, some of those things are harmful. And so Afrocentricity really allows us to think about who are we pre-enslavement, colonization, and really begin to reconnect with ourselves. And so I think part of that is having an African-centered worldview. And so when you have that worldview, it means that you're really thinking about how any psychology, any form of wellness affirms our humanity, affirms who we are as African people. And in African-centered, in terms of a worldview, we're very clear that the psychology that is used should illuminate who we are. So there should be a connection and healing to our spirit, that the spirit is the core. And so, sometimes in Western psychology, there's this thing where everything is separate. So if you experience a trauma, if that trauma is, physical, then you deal with the physical abuse. And we recognize in African-centered psychology that the spirit is the core, and that if you experience trauma, the whole being is impacted. And so there should be an exploration of healing with the various parts of someone, but also centering, our culture. And I think when I say our culture, I recognize our culture is both connected to our experience here in Western America, but I also think we should be mindful of who we are pre-colonization, enslavement, transatlantic Arab enslavement, and really think about what are those cultural practices, rituals, and values. And so, in African Center psychology, there's a thought, with some of the psychologists to go back, and really not to explore Africa as a utopia, but to reconnect to the culture. And so the concept of re-Africanization is really important, understanding who one is. And so I think when we understand who we are, to your question, it makes me think about how we can also contribute to our collective wellness. And so thinking about a concept like Ubuntu, that they often use in South Africa, which is I am because we are. Frantz Fanon asked us to think about who are we, also asked us to think about who we are in terms of who we say we are. And all of these questions are around self-actualization. But in terms of African-centered thought, the self is only relevant to the community. And so when we think about who we are in our healing, it should also begin to impact the collective, ethos, which is like the collective emotional tone. And so I think it gives us language, it gives us tools to really put us at the center rather than putting white America and even tools from the APA at the center, which in a lot of respects have caused us even more harm.
It's very interesting you used the term spirit when you were talking. And I remember from our last conversation, Joy, you spoke of your Black soul and how it was soothed. Does that connect with, for you, with what Jason was just talking about in terms of Afrocentrism?
It does. As I mentioned in the previous, earlier today, my mother is white, and I her husband is white, and he adopted me, and they have 5 more white children. So this idea of Afrocentrism was not ever really introduced to me until I became older and really started to uncover and discover on my own, and still am. And there's the idea you- of understanding the beauty that is in being Black, which was never introduced to me as a young person, as a young child. I was, always the ugliest one in the class, and never realized my beauty until I was probably in my early 20s, and still struggle with accepting that. But to what Jason was saying, going back and looking at who we were before we were taken as slaves, and came what we came from, and the people and the goodness that we are and represent, that our souls, just even as just human beings, are so innately good and so full of love and life and joy, that the narrative of our nation has really demonized those things, and not given us the opportunity to extend those things to our nation, because we really are, you know we are a part of the nation's history, but we're denied that. And it's really nice now to be connecting with other Black people, to be able to connect on these levels, around even just Black joy during these times of pain, which is something that I think is really unique to Black people, and is, I think, something that came it's that other thing. It's not just trauma that is passed down generation to generation. It's that love, it's that joy, it's all of those good things that are passed down as well. And we bring those things, and they have so much value to this, to our culture and to our nation. Um, and recognizing those things really does bring healing to my Black soul during a time, where it's just not recognized as a valuable contribution.
Lisa, I'd like to get your thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, Joy has me just sitting here crying my eyes out. I absolutely relate to being the ugliest girl in class, being the girl with the big nose and the weird hair, and people spitting in my hair, and my mom having to cut gum out of my hair. So I think for being that we both have white families, there is that um, I it's so beautiful hearing about going back to the beginning and reconnecting with those with who we are from the start and the community. And but then that's where I feel kind of lost, because I've got so much farther to go, I feel like, because I don't really have those connections. So I don't know. I mean, I just feel, I mean, even growing up, it was like when I finally met other Black people, I was just so completely different. And I mean, I think back to some of the things I said that I thought were humorous or interesting. And I realized, God, no wonder nobody liked me, that even the Black kids didn't like me, because I was just so, I had no idea. And I think back now to things that I realized I was completely traumatized by, that I had framed in a way of, oh, my grandmother, my great grandmother was the first one to hold me and say, don't tell your cousins, but this little N-word baby is my favorite great grandchild, which A, I didn't really need to know. And B, I had framed it in this, but it was someone that was ignorant, and they, they felt love for me. And I'm realizing, like, A, that's not my job as an infant. And B, if you're that old, I mean, if you're that much older, you could have changed, you could have learned, you could have progressed your thinking. I know I have. And so, I mean, I feel like I have so far to go, that I feel like I start to progress and feel strong in who I am. And then it's like, wow, I mean, do I have any idea? I mean, so it's heavy. It's really heavy.
Jason.
I just want to say really quickly, Lisa, I think your vulnerability is beautiful. And I think you're speaking to the experience of so many people, that it's a journey. Like, what has happened to our people historically has somewhat removed us from who we are culturally and ancestrally. And I think we have time. And I think it's one day at a time. I think building community is important, where we get to connect with other people that see us and have similar experiences. And here's the thing, we're not a monolith. There's a spectrum of Blackness that I think is so beautiful. I think we often see this dynamic where it's like, if you don't listen to this, or you don't do this, or you don't eat this, or you don't come from here, then people begin to measure your Blackness or chastise you. And for me, it's more of a spectrum. Like, we come from all different walks of life, have so many different perspectives, and so our beauty is infinite. And so I just want to say, your journey, you're not alone in that journey. We're all trying to learn. And so even when I think about the original question around those concepts, mean very little if we're not being and growing ourselves, in a way that acknowledges our humanity. I think those concepts are really just about given us, they're like placeholders, so to speak, to kind of guide us on our journey. So I just, I think what you're saying is beautiful, and you're not alone.
You are tuned to listener-supported 90.7 FM KSQD, K-Squid, community radio for the Monterey Bay. And this is State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. We're also live streaming over the web at ksqd.org. I'm your host for today's show, Dr. Robert Bartee, and I'm here talking with several local Black leaders, activist Joy Flynn, educator and musician Lisa Taylor, and educator activist Jason Seals. We're here talking about systematic barriers to healthcare and specifically mental health support for Black people and people of color, and what we can do to help improve that access. Our guests are also sharing specific resources. Stay with us to learn more, and we'll be back right after this brief message from our underwriter.
KSQD thanks County Park Friends for supporting State of Mind. County Park Friends is proud to help launch the Tannery World Dance and Cultural Center's Black Health Matters initiative, which promotes safe outdoor activities. Fellow Black community members are invited. More information is at tanneryworlddance.com/countyparks. Thank you, County Park Friends, for supporting community radio K-Squid 90.7 FM.
Back to our interview. So I wanted to give you all an opportunity to really sort of think about this and challenge all of us as professionals in the field of healthcare and mental health. I was wondering, what are some of the things that we as professionals can and should do differently for Black people, people of color seeking services, and especially mental health services or support? Jason, you have any thoughts on that?
I have a few things. One, I think for people of African ancestry, I think there's a lot of resources out there that somewhat are overlooked. One of the things for folks here locally in the Bay Area, I would say Sankofa Holistic Institute is really a good space. I think the approach that they take is tailored to people of African ancestry. They also have other people of color that are also therapists and psychologists there as well. For those that are outside of the Black community, I think it's really important that they are thoughtful about their training and their consciousness and anti-Blackness. It's not do I or don't I, it's your anti-Blackness. I think that white therapists and psychologists should just own that they have a level of anti-Blackness, because even Black people have a level of anti-Blackness they have internalized. And so I think it's about doing that work. I think it's also about centering the people and the culture and allowing them to be at the forefront of that. I think there has to be some internal work. Just like social justice, it says center yourself and do your work and find your blind spots. It's the same thing. It's really important to think about, what have you learned about Black people, and being clear, on the level of bias, anti-Blackness that people have been exposed to and how that shows up. I mean, even something as simple as the media, there aren't very many positive images of people of African ancestry. So if you don't have any immediate contact with people of African ancestry, family, friends, or whatever, and the media is your only source, then it's hard for me to believe that you're going to be able to engage, support, love, nurture someone of African ancestry from this really authentic place. And I think the things that you don't know, you have to be transparent about. And I think that if you recognize that you have a struggle with supporting a person of African ancestry, I would say be transparent and refer them out to someone that could support them in a way that you don't have the capacity to do so. I mean, that's one of the things that we are taught in school anyway, is that when you have a therapist you feel like you can't support, whether it's because of transference or whatnot, you find someone else to refer. And it's the same thing here. And other thing that I'll say is really important is there's so much literature out there, right? There's African psychology, Black psychology has been around since the late 60s. So this isn't a new phenomenon. This is something that we just kind of pulled out, out the the stratosphere, it's here. And there's so many scholars and so many books out there. And so, I think even looking at Thomas Parham's book, where he's talking about psychology of blacks, right? Centering the perspective of African consciousness. I think that's a great text. But there's so many books out there. I mean, you got Baba Wade Noble, Seeking the Saku. You have Dr. Marcia Sutherland, Black Authenticity. Even Patricia Dixon, she's a historian, sociologist over at Georgia State. She has the text African American Relationships, Marriages, and Families, an introduction. And she goes into a myriad of topics, whether it's around the history of the family, whether it's around male development, woman development, whether it's around trauma, love, attachment. And then she talks about Western ideas. She talks about African ideas. So she gives a contrast so people that are reading can really explore. So there's so much literature out there, is that I would say, if you're going through a program and you're learning about, Freud and Gestalt and Erikson, you could find value in those things, but then also couple it with some other scholars that represent the communities that you're going to serve, so you have a better understanding of what are the tools and the ways to support healing and wellness.
Joy.
I really loved everything you had to say, Jason. That was fantastic. I think the other thing, we're talking specifically about mental health, and one of the things that feeds mental health is nutrition. So making sure that we're not just looking at finding a practitioner that is, Black or of African descent, that just is going to work with us on our mental health. I know a Black nutritionist in Santa Cruz, and she is, really, really fantastic, and really speaks to the understanding of support from a nutritional standpoint as a Black woman, um, treating, Black people. And her name's Jocelyn Dubin, and I can make sure that you have her information to put it on the website. And then other nutritionists, if they're following kind of traditionally African ideas around kind of a natural way of treating us. I think that, I listen to a lot of what Dr. Sabi, who is a Black nutritionist, vegan, his whole idea is about supporting Black people in their nutrition, and kind of coming away from the traditional American way of eating, because the idea is that it was not meant to support Black people. It was actually meant to oppress Black people. And so, again, just looking at nutrition, finding again, going back to what Jason said about making sure that the practitioner is doing the work, basically. There's other ways that we can care for ourselves too. And I think it all comes down to naturopathic medicine. There's acupuncture and massage therapy. And especially with massage therapy, you're having somebody put their hands on you. So there's a real true energy exchange that happens there. And so making sure that that person is really truly caring for our bodies and mindful of who we are and what our experiences are. And again, going back to what Jason was saying, is making sure that, again, that they're doing the work.
Lisa.
Just listening as well to just what Jason said about just having all these little epiphanies here of, yeah, you need to be doing the work. I mean, you need to be checking your bias, examining yourself. We all have bias. And just as with being a teacher and sending children out into the world to be good humans, especially if you're a therapist or any kind of venue or occupation where you're teaching people to take care of themselves, mind, body, spirit, etc. Please make sure you've checked your bias, done the work on yourself, because I had a really good friend recently tell me how, oh yeah, I know that Black boys are really strong and athletic, and I'm just thinking, if you've got things like that that are just ingrained in you that you don't even question of whether that's a stereotype or not, you're going to have different expectations. You're going to give your patient or your client a different path to take in finding their strength and their wellness. If you think they already have that, how are you going to help them work on achieving that? So it's so important to do the work on yourself first.
Thank you to our guests, Joy Flynn, Lisa Taylor, and Jason Sills for being part of today's important discussion. For our listeners, now that you've heard our stories and listened to us share our thoughts, we call on you to ask yourself, what can I do? Where can I start to be a part of a solution for Black people and people of color around issues of mental health? What is my role as a layperson or community member where people of color work and live? What is my role as a provider, gatekeeper, or healthcare professional to improve access and quality of service and experience for Black people and people of color seeking health and mental health services? And finally, can I help to advocate for social change and social justice? Can I move from being an ally to becoming an accomplice? And can I rally others to join me? Thanks for joining us today.
This is Deborah Sloss, and I want to say a huge thank you to the host today, Dr. Robert Barti, and to all of our guests. And thanks to you for joining us here on State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. To hear more conversations about mental health and wellness, join us on the first Sunday of every month from 6 to 7 p.m. right here at K-Squid, 90.7 FM. Special thanks to Jeannie Baldzikowski for audio production and to Jennifer Young, who assists with research and outreach. And thanks to acoustic guitarist Adrian Legg for composing, performing, and donating the use of our theme music. You can find all the podcast episodes of this show on our ksqd.org website by typing State of Mind in the search bar. Or subscribe and get them delivered directly to your listening device on either Apple or Google Podcasts. Or listen to the show through your home smart speaker by saying, play State of Mind with host Deborah Sloss on TuneIn. This is listener-supported community radio, so that means we want and we need to hear from you. If you like this or any previous State of Mind episodes, please help the shows get found and heard by more listeners by leaving us a rating or review on Apple or Google Podcasts. It really does help. This is KSQD Santa Cruz. Just remember, 90.7 FM, K-Squid, your ink spot on the dial. Stay with us.